Welcome to tonight's webcast, Micronutrients, a review with Laura LaValle. Laura LaValle is a registered dietitian and nutritionist who has years of experience in hospital-based dietetics, as well as extensive experience in integrative medicine settings, including in clinic. She's extremely knowledgeable in all things dietetics, and I know you'll enjoy her presentation today. We'll open up for a question and answer session at about 10:15 till, so please raise your hand or use the chat box if you have a question. I'm Libby Bricker, your moderator, and I'm recording tonight's session, and we'll post it to our blog on metaboliccode.com for reference within 24 to 48 hours. I'll let Laura take it from here.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We had a great turnout for this webinar. A lot of people that signed up, showing a good bit of interest in this topic. I'm going to try something new that I haven't done before with the webinars. I'm going to do this particular topic in a couple of sessions. The reason being, as I started to go through this, there are such a vast amount of nutrients to cover, and I'm really trying only to go into more relevant or more pertinent ones that we tend to deal with the most in integrative practice from my experience. So I'm really not even covering everything, but even with limiting down the numbers, it got to be rather long, and I'd rather be able to cover each nutrient in a little more depth than to breeze through and just barely skim the surface. So with that being said, let's move forward. Now, for those of you who have joined us, me in particular previously, you notice that what I do is I try to relate every topic that I cover back to the different areas that we focus on in Metabolic Code nutrition programs. So we're using Metabolic Code to figure out people's health issues and health problems, and to therefore build better health and to help people be able to better manage their weight, because that's the biggest crisis facing us in healthcare in the United States is the 2/3 of our population that are overweight and obese. So I've used a slide in each of my presentations and I highlight in the sort of light green font there to show, okay, well in this webinar I'm going to be dealing with insulin resistance and gut health, or perhaps sex hormone balance, something like that. So what we do is we have the combination of diet and a specific way of doing diet to help people address gut health and insulin resistance issues in particular, but then also making sure to support anything that could disrupt a person metabolically. So whether they have chronic high levels of stress, whether their thyroid doesn't seem to be functioning optimally, whether they may have toxicity issues, they may have sex hormone imbalances, not optimal amounts of sex hormones affecting their health, and we address all these areas, and that's how we crack a person's metabolic code, we call it. We could say cracking their health code. So how do we get optimal health? How do we achieve better vitality, no matter where a person is with their age or where they are with their current health status? We can optimize by approaching our health program in this way. So if you look at this in terms of, if you want to go to the next slide, in terms of vitamin and mineral intake, well, I would literally highlight every area, because our micronutrient status affects everything from the person's insulin resistance to the gut health to their stress to thyroid to toxicity. We need optimal amounts of all the vitamins and minerals to keep all of these areas functioning optimally. So for example, with insulin resistance, it's, if we have a person that's showing signs and symptoms of insulin resistance, which means that, their waist is bigger than their hips, or they tend to gain their weight in their midsection when they do gain weight, and their blood sugar is creeping up, and their blood pressure is creeping up, and their lipids are elevated, we have that milieu of insulin resistance. So how insulin resistant a person is, one of the things we use as a barometer for that is if you put them on a lower carb diet, which is one of the features of our metabolic code diet, And as soon as you start to introduce carbohydrates again, they start to gain weight very rapidly. That's another indicator that their body just can't handle carbohydrates. They don't metabolize carbohydrates well. So what we do in our practice is we replete their nutritional, all the nutrients that affect carbohydrate metabolism. So things like magnesium, chromium, zinc. Some people work with vanadium. We don't work with that in particular always. Certain parts of the B vitamin, thiamine. There are many others. Vitamin D influences this. Alpha lipoic acid, which doesn't fall into a vitamin mineral category as a nutrient that's influences this heavily. So we address it by giving a, in our particular instance, our nutritional blend that we formulated for this particular incidence is GluteReg4. So that's the way we do it with the metabolic code. For gut health, you know, probiotics, again, not a vitamin and mineral, but it's something that influences gut health so strongly that that's part of what I wanted to do throughout this presentation. I want to make sure that I don't just talk about the vitamins and minerals themselves, but I talk about the other nutrients that can affect it or substances that can affect it. In particular, in our metabolic code line of nutritional supplements, we have our Mucosa Calm, which is a supplement that contains zinc carnosine because it's a, and I've got the reference for it at the bottom of the slide, it's a nutrient that is well studied and well known to help rebuild gut tissue linings. So even in this particular study is indomethacin-induced gut permeability, which, you know, and indomethacin is a common drug used in rheumatoid arthritis, and we know that NSAIDs break down gut linings. But when you give it concurrently with zinc carnosine, we didn't see the gut permeability develop in this study. So this is how powerful individual nutrients can be, and it's why I wanted to cover this topic and make sure that we covered it very thoroughly. So just to quickly go through, you can see with stress, we for sure want to make sure that people have adequate intake of magnesium, adequate intake of B vitamins, which influence neurotransmitter production, so different neurotransmitters that can get out of whack under chronic long-term stress, and things like vitamin C, because under chronic long-term stress, our adrenal glands start to actually not start to become exhausted, so to speak, and vitamin C is a nutrient that helps keep adrenal glands happy, very happy. They need a lot of vitamin C. For thyroid function, we have a formula that includes iodine, selenium, zinc, iron, and vitamin A and vitamin C are very important for thyroid hormone function as well. So, of course, we need to make sure we have adequate iodine. We all know that thyroid hormones are made from iodine. But there are things that are important, the other trace minerals like selenium and iron that help transporters for the iodine and tyrosine, and selenium that helps the conversion. And there's a known role for vitamin A. In fact, in third world countries, when they're trying to give iodine to kids who are iodine deficient, they have to make sure that they have adequate vitamin A also, or the iodine supplements don't work. So this is all the kinds of interactions that influence our vitamin mineral status, and these are all the reasons why we need them. You know, there are a variety of nutrients that are needed for phase 1 and phase 2 detox pathways. Selenium is a trace mineral that in particular is important. A lot of people don't realize that when we use sex hormones for people to balance certain areas of, you know, important, you know, sex hormone function, it can deplete magnesium somewhat. So we need to make sure that we get adequate magnesium in that instance. So this is why I wanted to cover this topic. There's a lot of interplay. So what we're going to attempt to do here is not only review different vitamins and minerals and their functions and what they do in the body. I'll talk a little bit about deficiency symptoms, and I'll tell you the reason, because even though we don't see a lot of out and out, nutrient deficiencies in terms of things like beriberi, we do see functional deficiencies. And what I want to try to review with you is what I still see today. I've been in nutrition a long time. I know we don't have very many people going about with, frank deficiencies, but I do still see many people walking around with nutrient deficiencies, functional deficiencies. And, sometimes when you look up vitamin and mineral deficiencies, you read some of these strange symptoms and you think, where did that come from? So I just tell you what I see from my experience after so many years and what we see in our clinic after so many years of doing this. And of course, we do need to be cognizant of toxicity issues. Not every nutrient is a concern with that, but we can have some things that we need to be aware of on this. And then, what are the recommended intakes? What are food sources? And then, like I say, I want to discuss these other issues that can influence micronutrient status, such as, things like we've got to have a healthy gut. If we don't have a healthy gut, we're not going to be able to absorb nutrients well at the different sites where they absorb, and other issues that come up. Let's move on. So, first thing that I would like to talk about is, let's go through this thing of, you hear it all the time, and as integrative practitioners, maybe each of you have developed your way of addressing and talking about this. Maybe you've been to other conferences where Jim or I have lectured, and so you sort of know a little bit of this by now. But the big question, do we really need to take supplements? Even for vitamin and minerals, let's say. Let's disregard these other metabolic issues where supplements can be so helpful. But to get the nutrients we need in terms of the vitamins and minerals and some other nutrients, do we really need to take supplements? So what I would like to say is that we definitely need to guard against this mentality that some people tend to want to have, that, hey, if I just take my supplements, it sort of gets me off the hook of trying to eat more healthfully. And of course, there are all sorts of reasons why that is wrong, and it primarily has to do with the fact that, regardless of the fact if you are eating enough to get plenty, avoid any deficiencies of vitamins and minerals, what the real issues have to do more with things like your macronutrient balance, not overdoing it on carbs, especially refined carbs, making sure you're getting in adequate protein and healthy fats and fiber. So there's so much more to it than that. But I want to look at, what I tell people. And this is that, you need to try to get the vast majority of your micronutrients from a good, healthy diet, by far. Because those are the most bioavailable forms of nutrients compared to supplements, and you're going to do better with absorption and balance by getting them in your foods. And just by way of education, here's where the variety of foods advice comes in. So if you look at by food category, what nutrients do we tend to get by food category? Of course, in our fruits, they're a big source of carbohydrates, the simple sugars, natural sugars. We get water, we get fiber, but these are some of the best sources of things like vitamin C and folate and potassium. Vegetables are the same, non-starchy vegetables, except even though there are some carbohydrates in them, it's much less. And so you get a lot of the other nutrients, the fiber, the folate, the vitamin C, the potassium, and as well as a lot of minerals in a lower glycemic and lower calorie package. So they're very nutrient dense. Grains, we get carbohydrates in the form of starch. We get water, fiber, and a lot of B vitamins, so your folate, niacin, riboflavin. If they're whole grains, you'll get some minerals iron, magnesium, selenium in particular. And because of the oils in grains, they're a natural source of vitamin E. You get a little bit of protein. But the point being, if they're whole grains, you get more nutrition from them. But those are the nutrients that are typically found in grains. And of course, in our animal proteins, people think of it mainly as our source of protein, amino acids, and some essential fats. However, animal proteins are the only good absorbed source of vitamin B12. They also happen to be some of the best sources of other B vitamins like riboflavin. And again, we get a lot of good minerals from animal proteins. So we're not just getting amino acids with animal proteins. Our milks and cheese foods provide proteins, fats, and milk, the natural sugar, lactose, so that's why sugars are listed. But they're a source of calcium, and if they're fortified, you get vitamin A and D and riboflavin. But there's some important facts I'll share a little later on about milk and cheese and how they can help our nutritional status. Nuts and seeds, again, you're getting healthy fats. You get a little bit of starch in nuts and seeds. A lot of people don't realize that. A little bit of protein, but primarily they're a fat source, and therefore they're really rich in vitamin E. They're also very rich in trace minerals. And then we have different miscellaneous foods, things like avocado, olives, which again are natural high-fat, healthy fat foods. But then you have miscellaneous foods like mushrooms, which happen to be a particularly good source of potassium and other minerals, and actually vitamin D. So by eating the variety of all these foods, that is a way that we can ensure that we're getting a broad base of foods to provide all these essential nutrients that we need. However, as we know where this breaks down, why? Well, just our nutrition and health habits in the United States do not support intake of a lot of nutrient-rich foods, primarily because there's so many refined and processed foods. So it's possible to get through a day with eating everything out of boxes, bags, cans, bottles, and very refined and not rich in a lot of the nutrients. Therefore, when you analyze the diets of Americans, you see statistics such as these where 80% of the people are under the RDA for B6, 75% under the RDA for magnesium, 68% under for calcium, 50% for vitamin A. We do a little better on vitamin C, only 45%, not getting quite enough. And the huge nutrition studies, the NHANES studies, that an old one found, when we were going by the 5 a day mark for fruits and vegetables, not even 10% of Americans were getting 5 a day. Well, what are the more recent statistics? It hasn't really changed. Looking here at statistics that were gathered in studies and published in 2013 found that the average adult ate a little over 1 fruit serving per day and 1.6 vegetable servings per day. So, add that up, you're lucky if you have 3 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. So we're still not doing real well as a country with this nutritional intake. And yes, optimally, if we could get everybody to eat a really healthy diet, we would be able to avoid these horrible statistics, but that's what we seem to have a hard time being able to do. And so what we have is we have low intakes of the most nutrient-dense foods, the fruits and vegetables. And therefore, these are a big part of the reason why people are lacking in intake in a lot of these different vitamins and minerals. They have high intake of energy-dense, nutrient-poor foods, the refined sugars, flours, and separated fats known as oils, which at least with oils you typically get some vitamin E. but it just means that you're taking in a lot of calories and you're not taking in the nutrients that you need to process those calories. So not only is the intake poor, but we also have a situation where the nutrients in our foods are declining. And this is documented. From the 1950s to 1999, many nutrients that were analyzed all declined. And what they looked at here were garden crops, so produce. So protein levels that form in the plants are lower. Calcium levels are lower. Phosphorus, iron. Now, the minerals, remember, they absorb from the soil. The vitamins form as a process of the growth of the food, with the process of absorbing sunshine and photosynthesis and everything. That's how the vitamins form. So things like riboflavin and vitamin C all declined. All of those are examples of nutrients. So magnesium, looking at magnesium, this is just an example. Magnesium in Brussels sprouts, from 1950, it was at a level of almost 20 milligrams per 100 grams of the food. 100 grams is not quite a quarter of a cup. So didn't have to eat very many to get a pretty decent dose of magnesium. To now, more current levels are only 8 milligrams per 100 grams. So it still is a decent source, but not like it used to be, and it's because our soils are depleted. We just don't have the same ways of regenerating the soils. For one thing, we don't allow, now we have flood control. Flood management is a big issue in this. It used to be in days before we managed, rivers with dams and things like that, that when we would get heavy rains, every so often you would have flooding. And what would happen is the organic matter would wash back up onto the fields out of the river. It would get carried up in the water, and that actually was a way of repleting the soils. And then also using more manure and organic matter for ways of fertilizing soil, whereas now it's just chemically done. And unfortunately, in some of those chemical complexes, while the nutrients might be in the fertilizers, some of the problems that they find is that they actually kind of get locked into the soil and they can't get, therefore, absorbed up into the plant. So those are some of the issues. Another thing of the issue, thing that affects this, is that we go for high yield crops today. So in other words, let's say I plant a tomato plant, and just as an example, in years past, maybe one tomato plant might give us 20 tomatoes. Now we're looking for that tomato plant to give us 30 or 40 tomatoes in one plant, absorbing nutrients from that same bit of soil, and those nutrients get spread out to more food. So each food contains less of the nutrients. So these are issues that could be impacting this decline. And then you put on top of that things like people using a variety of prescription drugs today that can affect their nutritional status. So you have people using aspirin to help control their heart disease risk. That depletes vitamin C. People that need to use oral contraceptives, again, indomethacin, the anti-inflammatory NSAID, it depletes vitamin C. Vitamin D is depleted by your anticonvulsant category of drugs, by corticosteroids, by H2 antagonists, and these are common drugs that people end up using. These are not the uncommon things. Vitamin K gets depleted by antibiotics and laxatives. B6, you tend to deplete B6 when people need to be on estrogens. Diuretics, hydralazine. So you can read through the rest of these, the depletions that occur, but the point being, when people need to use prescription drugs, and not necessarily for an illness, but, you know, like in the case of oral contraceptives, antibiotics, you just occasionally may need one, you've got to watch out for your micronutrient status. So this is another thing that influences our micronutrient status. So this is another reason why we may see that people develop deficiency problems. Okay. Just to clarify some of the nomenclature that you see with vitamins and minerals, we're all most used to the RDA, the recommended daily amount of a nutrient. And this was established in 1941 by the National Academy of Sciences. And you'd see the year, 1941. Basically, you know, a lot of the vitamins weren't even discovered until the early 1900s. And from there, it took some time to realize things like, you know, deficiency symptoms. And so when the mindset in the, you know, in the mid-1900s was, what amount of the different vitamins and minerals that we've discovered do we need to prevent these vitamin deficiencies that were being seen, scurvy and beriberi, for examples. So the mindset was an amount that would prevent the deficiency symptom, and it could be fairly low. So as time has gone on, what has happened is that the Food and Nutrition Board, this is regulated and studied and addressed now by the Food and Nutrition Board, which is part of the Institute of Medicine. So it's, I'm happy to say there's an awareness that it's not just about preventing deficiency. It's about trying to determine what is an optimal level of nutrient to prevent chronic illnesses like things like heart disease and cancer. So we're not just looking at deficiency, we're looking at an amount that would help support more optimal health. Within the dietary reference intakes, they publish, and they update these every so many years now, they publish these 4 values: the estimated average requirement, the RDA, still again, the recommended daily amount, the AI, what would be considered adequate intake. So that's kind of like the old RDA, which is what would be enough to prevent a deficiency. And what is the upper limit? Sometimes you'll see tolerable upper limit. So what would be too much? And those 4 values make up the DRIs. Now, to show you on the next slide what became of the numbers when they made these changes, it's been interesting, to say the least, for those of us who have been in nutrition for a long time. One thing that happily was done was that the recommended daily amount for folate doubled. So this was in response to preventing spinal cord birth defects. Vitamin C, wow, they upped it 30 whole milligrams. For those of us who work with vitamin C, you realize hardly anything, but at least they increased it. Now, interestingly, with calcium, the RDAs for calcium, have been reduced. And why might that be? Well, we've been seeing that perhaps over intake of calcium, especially for those of us who know nutrition, if you don't have adequate intake of other nutrients that you need to properly utilize that calcium, can increase some health risks. Kidney stones, plaquing in your arteries. So we don't want to take in too much calcium, especially if our body can't utilize it well because we don't have all the other nutrients that we need. And they up vitamin E a little bit. So in terms of what's going on here, the amounts are, when they do increase, are really conservative. But, at least they're working hard to try to determine these more optimal amounts. And we should continue to see these evolve into more meaningful numbers over time. So this slide shows, again, and you've seen this one in some other presentations, but I love it because it shows where different nutrients absorb as they travel through the intestinal tract, from the small intestine, the duodenum, through the jejunum, and on down. And I like this because it's just nice to have something like this as a reference. It's particularly important for it's gaining more importance due to bariatric surgeries. But anytime a person has had to have a surgery and have a section of their intestinal tract removed, we can look at the section that it is, and we can know the nutrients that it's most likely to affect. The other reason I like this is because I like to make the point to show that, you know, we really have to take care of our gastrointestinal tract. So, you know, our beneficial flora play a really active role in maintaining the health of our intestinal tract. But there are things that also affect it, such as I mentioned the use of NSAIDs and how they can cause the tissue in the gastrointestinal tract to break down. So if I see someone come in who has a history of they've had to be on quite a few antibiotics, and they you know, they've overused NSAIDs for whatever problem, chronic, you know, pain of some sort or headaches, I'm going to suspect that I'm going to see more micronutrient issues in that person. And that, you know, it's not just a matter of giving them a vitamin and mineral, it's a matter of rehabbing the gut tissue itself so that it can be, those nutrients can be absorbed. So what we're going to go through primarily tonight, with the time that we have left, are the fat-soluble vitamins. First, we're going to go over vitamin A, and let's see if we can get vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K are fat-soluble vitamins. And I highly recommend the Linus Institute at Oregon State as a reference for information on all the micronutrients. They do a fabulous job. They keep the information updated, and it's just a wonderful place as a go-to for a good spot when you want to read up on different nutrients. On vitamin A, our RDA is set at 900 micrograms. Typically on the labels it will be listed in IUs. Very inconveniently, the DRIs are typically listed out in micrograms to try to standardize, but then you have to know how to convert them into IUs depending on, you know, if that's what they use on the label. To make it really confusing with vitamin A, they list out things in terms of retinol activity equivalents. That's because for vitamin A, you can get it from retinol itself, which is the formed complete molecule of vitamin A. Retinol is found in animal sources, but you can also get vitamin A formed in the body by converting carotenoids of different types into vitamin A. So the body will take beta-carotene, alpha-carotene, and it will convert them into vitamin A. And nicely, the the Food Nutrition Board gives us some information on that. It takes about 12 micrograms of beta-carotene and 24 of alpha-carotene to get converted into the equivalent of 1 microgram of retinol. So 1 retinol activity equivalent. So I like that comparison. So you can see, well, you have to eat a lot of the carotenoids to equal a little bit that you get from an animal food. But what does vitamin A do? It plays a really big role in immunity. And it's kind of pertinent for today because vitamin A in particular helps to confer immunity against measles. So yeah, parents are wondering, should we vaccinate? Is there anything I could do? Well, one of the things you can do is make sure that your child has good vitamin A status. So it's really important for lymphocyte differentiation and for T lymphocyte activation. Another thing with vitamin A, it's an actual structural component of any epithelial cell that gets made in the body. So epithelial cells are our lining cells, like our skin and our mucous membranes and our gastrointestinal tract and our nasal passages, all made from epithelial cells. We also need vitamin A for our retinal pigments and therefore our vision, and in particular our night vision. But vitamin A plays a role in genetic expression. It also helps our, take our stem cells and help them to know how to differentiate into different cells in the body, healthy cells. You also, oddly, you wouldn't think of this, but you need vitamin A to be able to mobilize iron, like stores of iron in your body, say in the liver or various places, and get them into red blood cells. So it's got a wide variety of functions in the body. I didn't go through all of the deficiencies that could be listed, but if you know what it does, then you know what lack of it will do. You will notice compromised immunity, more prone to getting sick. It's not just vitamin C that influences that. Vitamin A has a big role in that. Since it influences our skin, our epithelial cells, if we don't have enough vitamin A, we'll see things like bumpy skin. In particular, that tends to happen on the back of the arms. They call it goose flesh. Or dry, rough skin. Even hangnails. That's something, if I see people with hangnails, I know that they need a little more vitamin A. And, we still see, and this tends to happen as we get older in particular, but it can be in a younger person. If people tell you, I can't see, very well at night, vitamin A. I just say, hey, get a little more vitamin A, and that'll really help that. So I really find this to be pertinent in everyday practice. These things come up all the time. And it's just very helpful, and people get so impressed when you know what micronutrient addresses that issue. So our sources are, orange fruits and vegetables, our dark green vegetables as well for plant sources. And in the animal sources, it's in eggs, it's in things like butter or cream and liver. So animal sources can be particularly good, as I noted earlier. Now, what about toxicity? What's going on with vitamin A? Well, vitamin A is the one that you hear nowadays that we really have to watch the amount in a multivitamin and mineral. Why? Because if you take in too much vitamin A, it can impact bone density. And there are a couple of theories for why too much vitamin A might do that, but the one that I think makes the most sense is the fact that, and this introduces this idea that one fat-soluble vitamin intake really affects another. So if you're taking in a lot of vitamin A, apparently it can impact our absorption of vitamin D. And if you're not getting enough vitamin D, that would affect bone density. Or they think that somehow it might directly cause the osteoclasts in bone to become more active, and of course those are the ones that break down your bone. The osteoblasts build your bone. So if vitamin A somehow triggers osteoclast, but it is seen, and 5,000 IUs is the amount that was found to cause bone loss in older adults, not necessarily in a younger healthy person, but in older adults. So we do need to watch for toxicity of vitamin A, but what I feel where this will go is that it won't be so much that we shouldn't take in very much vitamin A. We should limit the amount. What it will come down to is we need to make sure we take in really good, adequate amounts of all the fat-soluble vitamins, and in that way we will prevent toxicity symptoms while making sure that we have optimal amounts of the nutrients for our health. So the upper limit on vitamin A is set at 10,000 IUs. Try not to exceed 10,000 IUs, although 5,000 is the amount that can potentially cause bone loss in older adults. So what you're seeing right now is a trend toward getting, you'll see in multivitamin and mineral formulas that they're no longer putting in 5,000 IU or 10,000 IUs, they're lowering it to 25,000. And then, of course, one of the things that we need to be aware of with people on vitamin A is that they should not take any vitamin A if they're using Accutane. So, though, you know, you have to remember, ask people, do you use Accutane for your skin? And you have to be aware of that when we give them supplements. Okay, vitamin D. Wow, what a big bunch of stuff that we've been hearing and reading on vitamin D over the last few years. And of course, this is the nutrient that's taken such a huge turnaround for those of us dietitians and other people that have nutrition degrees. Wow, boy, do I remember these strong warnings, you know, vitamin D, the most toxic of all the vitamins and minerals, and it stores in the liver. You have to really be careful. And now, my goodness, we're giving very high dosages to optimize amounts and no toxicity, no toxicity. So here's what it is. The RDA for vitamin D up to age 70 is 600 micrograms or 600 IUs is what that is. And typically it is listed on labels in IUs. As we get older, they recommend upping it a little bit if you can and getting more. Try to keep the density of the bones primarily is why that is. And, you know, vitamin D, the number one thing we know it for is to keep our bones strong and healthy in our teeth and prevent rickets. So that's what everybody knows vitamin D. But what has been coming out over the last few years is how much vitamin D impacts so many areas of health, in particular immunity, because it modulates T cells. It also plays a role somehow, they're still sort of figuring out, but in insulin secretion and therefore glucose regulation. It also plays a role in the renin-angiotensin system, which of course is what controls our blood pressure. So without good amounts of vitamin D, we can't make proper amount of renin and we'll be more prone towards high blood pressure. So the deficiency symptoms, if we skip over how to assess vitamin D on that measure line, are, you know, if people don't get enough, and you will still see some kids that develop rickets because they don't get exposure to any sunshine, especially if they're dark-skinned nationalities that prevent the absorption of vitamin D. And so you see a lot of bone-related deficiency symptoms, the osteoporosis, osteomalacia, but we also know that if we don't get enough vitamin D, it could make us more prone towards the development of cancer, towards the development of autoimmune conditions, towards diabetes, high blood pressure, and a real common symptom that I don't think we screen quite enough for, and you will see this a lot, is just this tendency in a person toward muscle weakness or muscle pain. They just don't feel strong, they feel weak, or they have more muscle pain than you would think they should. And it's not all from fibromyalgia. Sometimes it can be simple vitamin D. So how do we assess vitamin D? We measure it in serum, the 25-hydroxy vitamin D form, the 25OH, and what is considered enough? Okay, this is where we have a lot of controversy. The Institute of Medicine, which is what guides the DRIs, the RDAs, says that if you have less than or equal to 12 nanograms per milliliter, that is not enough. That's insufficient amount. That's deficient amount, I mean. If you have 12 to 19, that's insufficient amount, so it's low, but it's not deficiency level. However, the U.S. Endocrine Society says we should be raising this. They feel that anything less than or equal to 20 nanograms is deficient. and 21 to 29 is insufficient, and sufficiency can be anywhere from 30 up to 100 nanograms per milliliter. So they're much more aggressive with what they feel that we need. Sources of vitamin D, yes, sunlight, best way to get it. However, you know, we are having more rates of skin cancer today. Our lack of ozone, I do think, is increasing risk from sun exposure for cancer. I know that, you know, you can also do the thought that, hey, if you get some sun and you get that good way of your body making vitamin D, it could decrease cancer risk. And there are some statistics floating around out there that say that people who get more sun actually have lowered rates of melanoma. So this is all what's getting fleshed out, you know, in the research. But in the meantime, you know, what do you tell people? Is it okay to have some sun exposure or not? Well, it only makes sense that if God designed us to, one of the best ways to make this nutrients is with sun exposure. It should be something that should be okay for our health. Of course, this is an area where right now I just take the moderate stance, because you know, there are some pretty compelling statistics for increased exposure leading to more cancer. So who knows what it is, and in the meantime, I don't want people to take too many chances, so I recommend moderate sunlight. Deep water fish is one of the only natural food sources of vitamin D. Otherwise, it is in egg and it's in fortified milk. But the only natural food source is fish, and in particular, deep water fish. So what happens if people don't like fish? You know, you can get it from eggs, but for most people, you're probably going to have to supplement some, especially with all the, you know, we live indoors, we work indoors, we're not living and working outdoors anymore. So again, a little more information on optimal levels. The National Academy of Science sets the 20 to 50 nanogram as an optimal level. And if you take 800 IUs per day and you take it with calcium, that's an amount that should help protect bone mineral density. That's a pretty conservative amount. There are statistics on the Linus polling site that say that if you take in for each 20 nanograms per milliliter, you reduce cancer risk 11%. So let's say if your level of vitamin D is 40 nanograms, you would have a 22% reduced risk of cancer. And that's how you can see where some people say go up to, you know, 100 even, and really reduce that risk. If you maintain even a level of 33, it's associated with a 50% reduced risk of colon cancer. And 40 nanograms is associated with a 50% lower risk of breast cancer. So, you know, vitamin D for cancer prevention is a big deal. You know, the studies are really, really strong. So, what do you do to replete vitamin D if you test and you see these very low levels? And I'll hold my hand up as a person who had a very low level. My level was 12 when I got it tested a few years ago. And that is typical for somebody who lives in a northern latitude. This is what was found in a study from Northern European country, that 76% of people tested had levels of 12 nanograms or less. And what they did in that study is that they repleted with the very high dosages. So I don't know if some of you out there do this. I find it to be really the most effective way to replete a very low level, is to give these 25,000 IU prescription dosages, one dose a week for 6 to 8 weeks, and just get that level up. In this study, it found that that dosage increased levels by 12 points for 100,000 units given, so 25,000 IUs for 4 weeks, by 17 for 150,000 IUs, so it's the 25,000 given over 6 weeks, or 27. So that was 200,000 units given. So 25,000 IUs for 8 weeks, and it really gets those levels up. And then you can use the lower dosage forms like the 5,000 IU liquids to maintain, or whatever level the person needs. And you just know by retesting. So what about toxicity? What happens? Can you get too much vitamin D? Well, apparently what can happen is if, because vitamin D makes us promote calcium and absorb more calcium. So you can have more calcium floating around in your blood because of vitamin D. And what has been found is that if you continue with these very high dosages, the literature suggests 50,000 IUs is what it takes over a long time, that you could increase risk for coronary artery disease because all that calcium, it'll tend to cause plaque, or you could increase risk for things like kidney stones. So some people say, hey, they don't think it would take nearly that much to cause these problems, and so they've become more conservative with vitamin D. But according to our authorities at the National Institute of Health, toxicity is highly unlikely at 10,000 IUs per day or less. But regardless of that, they tried to be very conservative, so they set the upper limit at 4,000 IUs. And one thing I do want you to be aware of, I've had people come in who have things like sarcoidosis, hyperparathyroidism issues. I've never had anybody with tuberculosis, but these are conditions where you can't get vitamin D because that calcium, that hypercalcemia can cause it to, with sarcoidosis, it can accumulate in the lungs. So lymphoma is also one thing that is listed where you should not give vitamin D. That's actually controversial. Now there's studies that suggest vitamin D might help survival rates in lymphoma. So, what do you do? The person has to decide for themselves on that one. Typically, if their doctor recommends they avoid it, they will. Okay, still running a little long. So despite the fact that I wanted to keep this short, so let's get through vitamin E and vitamin K, and that'll wrap us up. Okay, vitamin E. The RDA is 15 milligrams or 22.5 IUs. Vitamin E is super important as an antioxidant. We need it to help protect our cell membranes from free radical damage. We need it to protect our LDL cholesterol. And, vitamin E just is, again, it's this interaction with other nutrients. It helps our utilization of vitamin K, so it plays a role in our platelet aggregation or blood clotting tendencies. It enhances vasodilation. So a real important heart health nutrient. And another thing that they see is that it's playing a role in immunity more than we once thought. So any tissue that's prone towards oxidative damage is going to be at risk. So when we have severe deficiency, lack of intake of vitamin D, we'll see things like a tendency toward neuropathy and retinopathy, even muscle weakness, and oddly impaired balance and coordination. And again, this might have to do with the effects of, oxidative stress and damage on the nervous system. But what we're really hearing more about today is make sure we get adequate vitamin E to help protect the health of our eyes, protect us against the retinopathy and macular degeneration, and to protect against oxidative damage to the lens of our eyes, so cataracts. And we need it for heart health. And now they're knowing that it plays a role probably in Alzheimer's dementia. So where do we get vitamin E? Wheat germ is a good source, and other oils. What if people can't eat wheat? Well, lots of nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds are a great source. You actually get more vitamin E in other plants than you realize. You get it in dark green leafies, and you get it in avocados. There's some in egg yolk, and also whole grains. I forgot to list that, but the oils from grains do contain some vitamin E. Could it become toxic? Well, apparently if we take in tons and tons of vitamin E, the thought is that it could make us more prone towards having too thin of blood. So we would want to watch this in terms of bleeding risk. So it's a good idea to be aware of this. We just play it safe rather than sorry. If we know someone's going in for surgery, we take them off of vitamin E for a few days prior to surgery. So we don't want to take any risks. So those are just the things that you need to be aware of. Vitamin E, this was interesting, as you probably all know by now. We needed natural alpha tocopherol, not the synthetic versions. The mixed tocopherols are preferred due to, I didn't finish that sentence, because it's felt that if we take in only one type of tocopherol, that it would lower the absorption of the other types, so it's alpha, gamma, and delta tocopherols in particular. One of the big issues with vitamin E that I think people kind of forget about, most of us are not advocates or proponents for very low-fat diets, but if you have someone come in that was steered toward a very low-fat diet for some reason, it does affect the absorption of vitamin E. In fact, vitamin E will not absorb without some dietary fat to make it go into the blood. So it's really important to have some fat in the diet to make sure you're absorbing your vitamin E. In terms of the supplement form, the vitamin E esters are considered to be better because if you just do straight alpha tocopherol, it apparently is prone towards oxidation just from oxygen in the air. And if you have it in those ester forms, it protects it against that. And in terms of interaction between different types of nutrients, this is where we can take in good vitamin E, but taking in a little bit of vitamin C too helps that vitamin E to stay active, because what it does is once the vitamin E donates its electron to neutralize a free radical, it is now no longer a good antioxidant. Well, what vitamin C can do is come along and donate an electron back to it, and it'll get it back to its active state. So it's cool, the interaction between the nutrients. Okay, vitamin K. Another nutrient that all of a sudden is front and center in importance for our health. We're talking more today about vitamin K than ever, and it's because it's needed for healthy blood clotting and balance of our anticoagulant proteins. So not over clotting, but keeping our blood a nice ability to clot, but not clot too much, and therefore cause problems with strokes and heart attacks. Vitamin K2, so this is the big development, as we found out there's more than one type of vitamin K. And even within the vitamin K2, there are several different forms of it now that have been identified. MK4, MK7, 8, and 9. This is the form of K that directs our calcium. So when we say over intake of vitamin D might make too much calcium go into the blood, could it be that really people aren't getting enough K2? It's not the over amount of vitamin D, it's that they don't have the K2 they need to direct calcium properly to where it needs to go, into the bone, and to prevent calcification of soft tissue with calcium. That's what we need K2 for. So if we don't have enough of the vitamin K, K1 and K2, we'll be prone toward osteoporosis, increased risk of fractures in our bones, and we'll be at increased risk for heart disease, things like kidney stones, anything that not getting that calcium to where it needs to go could cause. So calcification of the arteries. We get vitamin K from dark green leafies or any green vegetables in particular. That's K1, but our K2 is formed by intestinal bacteria. So, and interestingly, once it's formed in the gut, it just absorbs straight through and goes via the blood to the blood vessels and the bones. So probiotics, I listed that. That is super important for making sure we have good production of vitamin K2. You can supplement with K2, but we really need the probiotics anyway, and if we're taking good probiotics, it'll help protect and make sure that we're directing our calcium where it needs to go and lowering our risk for heart disease. So you'll see foods listed for a source of vitamin K2, natto, which is a fermented soy product. You'll see also cheese, egg yolk, butter, and animal proteins listed as good sources of K2. But green leafies and probiotics, super important for vitamin K. So when you look at your clients today and you look at the average person, you say, are we meeting nutrition needs? Yes, for the most part, the average person walking around is eating enough nutrients in the diet that they don't have outright deficiencies. But boy, we really need to look out for the chronic under intake of super important nutrients to protect people, their health for the long term. So tonight I talked about our fat soluble vitamins, and next week I'll talk about water soluble vitamins and minerals. And you know, so we can avoid this the issues from chronic under intake of these important nutrients. So the end result today is we have an over intake of calories from all these refined foods, and we're just not getting the vitamins and minerals we need, and therefore this is all contributing to, you know, the high rates of chronic disease we see today. And I just like really making sure to watch out for these micronutrient issues in practice. It's so important. You know, vitamin D is an example of something that can make such a difference for a person's quality of life. I know it did for me. I definitely felt a difference in my feeling of strength in my body and in my immune system with vitamin D. So as a summary for our metabolic code diet, you know, we do the other things with the diet with low glycemic load and food allergy intolerance, and we do things like we have to preserve the gut health. But we certainly don't need to ignore and we can enhance our practice and what we do for our clients by being aware of micronutrient issues and addressing them as necessary. So next time, so supplements per individual needs, and how do we know it if we don't assess it? Next time, like I said, I'll go into water-soluble nutrients and minerals. And do we have any questions?
What dosage of vitamin E do you suggest for lowering LDL?
Well, you know what? If you don't mind, I will make myself a note to try to address this in more depth next time, because part of this vitamin E dosage has to do with what form of vitamin E you give. I really like the mixed tocopherols, and I know that Jim, my husband, whenever he does formulations for vitamin E, he tries to use the vitamin E succinate form. But you know, I do feel that this is one nutrient where the RDAs are really low. The reason why I'm hedging on the dosage is because now we've got another thing that plays in this, and that is the tocotrienols supplements are coming on so strong as being a real effective way to protect heart health. But in general, if I'm looking at you know, an alpha tocopherol, I would look more in line with amounts that are around like at least 12,000 or, you know, 1,500 to 2,000 IUs. That's just with straight vitamin D. So, you know, most of them are looking at levels of like 800 to 1,000 milligrams if you're looking at it in terms of milligram dosages. But I've made myself a note, and I'll actually dig in a little better to make sure I can give you a better answer. We tend to not not use as much separate vitamin E as I know some other practices do, because we look at lowering risk in a lot of other ways. You know, gut health being one of the most important, like making us prone towards inflammation and all the plaquing problems that happen as a result of damage from lipopolysaccharide and things like that. So that's why, you know, it's not one of our real go-to things like a lot of practices, but that's my recommendation in general. And I'll get more specific on that next time.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm not seeing other questions come in. I do have a thank you for the information. And as you mentioned, we'll follow up on that next time. I will post the next webinar on our events page on metaboliccode.com, where I will also post the recording of tonight's session on our blog. Also, if you are not yet a subscriber, you can register for a demonstration of the Metabolic Code system to see how you can incorporate that into your own practice. Just go to the platform section of metaboliccode.com. So thank you, Laura, for the great presentation, and thank you all for attending tonight's session. We appreciate you being here, and everyone have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to pick this up next time.